Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a genuine anomaly of classical antiquity, Plautus's play Amphitryon. We're looking at a text that completely defies standard genres. It forces this violent collision between the absolute, untouchable authority of the gods and the gritty, mundane realities of a Roman household. So, this isn't just some light comedic farce, it is a meticulously constructed crisis of reality, staged directly for the Roman public. Here's our roadmap for the text. We'll start with the thematic thesis, move through the historical and cultural context, examine the literary composition and style, dig into the ethical and philosophical framework, trace the dialectical progression and character arcs, and wrap up with its transmission and enduring legacy. Part 1. Introduction and Thematic Thesis, the singular mythological subject. What makes Amphitryon so incredibly unique is that it's actually the only surviving mythological subject in Plautus's entire body of work. He takes these revered Hellenic myths and, frankly, aggressively domesticates them. Right from the prologue, Plautus deliberately crashes the high-stakes, elevated world of the deities straight into the absolute lowest stratum of Roman domestic life. He even coins the Latin term tragi-comedy to describe it. The entire tension of the piece relies on just how shockingly inappropriate it is to drop literal deities into a domestic farce. Moving on to Part 2, historical and cultural context, the Macy influence. Structurally, this play is a strict fabula palliata, meaning it's a Roman comedy presented in Greek dress, but it brilliantly illustrates the historical transition into Massé, or middle comedy. This specific era was defined by a distinct flavor of mythological burlesque. Instead of focusing on grand, untouchable heroes, these epic myths were suddenly grounded, using highly recognizable stock characters. The boastful soldier, the conceited cook, the comic victim. It fundamentally altered the way the divine was staged for the public. This contrast perfectly highlights how the text completely abandons the biting political satire of old comedy. Instead of directly impersonating and attacking specific public figures, it pivots to a generalized ridicule of human follies. Plautus leverages this historical shift to turn the mythological lens inward. He focuses entirely on domestic vulnerability rather than civic policy. Now, the underlying architecture of the play relies heavily on three massive shifts. First, the structural chorus is reduced to a mere vestigial element. Second, there's a complete absence of public impersonation. And third, ridicule is generalized toward those recognizable human typologies. Think about what that actually means for the audience reading or watching this. Without a chorus there to mediate the truth, the deception inflicted on the mortal characters becomes infinitely more isolating and honestly psychologically profound. Part 3. Literary Composition and Style, the Architecture of Tragicomedia. The internal logic of the humor here comes from a stark, almost painful impropriety, the divine interacting with the enslaved. It forces the tragic, weighty gravity of kings like Creon and Amphitryon to literally share a narrative space with the physical slapstick of the servant, Socia. As Mercury explicitly notes in the prologue, it is fundamentally inappropriate for gods to act as equals or abusers to slaves. Yet this exact social subversion is exactly what drives the play's structural paradox. Part 4. Ethical and Philosophical Framework, the Crisis of Mortal Truth. This brings us to a brilliant illustration of the umpire's dilemma. Blefaro, the pilot, is rendered completely incapable of arbitrating a domestic dispute simply because the divine impostor cannot be visually distinguished from the mortal general. It poses a truly terrifying philosophical question. If visual reality can be perfectly counterfeited by cosmic authority, does mortal truth even exist anymore? Plautus systematically deconstructs human epistemology here, leaving his mortal characters with absolutely zero mechanism to verify their own reality. Part 5. Dialectical Progression and Character Arcs, Doubles, Deceptions, and the Umpire's Dilemma. To prevent total audience confusion amidst all of this, Plautus introduces very specific dramaturgical anchors. Notice the specific visual cues established for the characters. Jupiter wears a turulus, a golden tuft beneath his cap, while Mercury wears pinnulae, little wings attached to his. These markers anchor our understanding of the deception. They allow us to sit back and watch the mortals fall into these psychological traps that we can clearly see, even when they can't. The deception escalates step by agonizing step. It moves from the theft of Amphitryon's physical likeness all the way to the theft of his personal seal, which depicts the sun rising with his chariot, culminating in total domestic collapse. Mercury doesn't just block Sosia from entering his own home, he systematically dismantles Sosia's belief in his own continuous existence. The theft of that identical physical goblet is the ultimate proof that the mortal realm has been completely hijacked by the divine. Ultimately, the structural conflict is resolved solely through a violent deus ex machina. The attendant, Bromia, describes a house literally blazing with golden light and the impossible, painless delivery of twins amidst a violent peal of thunder. The birth of the infant Hercules, who immediately strangles two crested serpents in his cradle, physically manifests this divine intrusion. So the conflict isn't solved by human reasoning, it is entirely subjugated by raw, supernatural power. Finally, Part 6, Transmission and Enduring Legacy, the acrostic argumentum. The archival transmission of this text is remarkably preserved via the acrostic argumentum, which is attributed to the grammarian Priscian. The first letters of these exact Latin words, amore, mutavit, pro, abitu, is, turbus, raptant, uter, omnem, boldly spell out the title, Amphitryo. This brilliantly constructed summary proves just how deeply embedded Plautine texts were in later Roman educational traditions, ensuring this play's survival through highly meticulous transcription methods. As we consider the enduring legacy of this text, we really have to ask ourselves, is the so-called divine reconciliation at the end actually an ethical resolution, or is it just a brutal assertion of cosmic hierarchy? Sure, Jupiter grants deathless glory, but only after irrevocably violating the sanctity of immortal marriage and personal identity. In the architecture of classical tragi-comedy, is human dignity ever a match for the whims of the gods? I'll leave you to ponder that ultimate power dynamic, one that Plautus leaves entirely and intentionally unresolved.